Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. I'm Catherine Kangany. I'm the Society's Vice President. We're so glad you're here. While we're waiting, if I could just ask you all to mute your microphones, that would be lovely. I have a few points of housekeeping, which I'll just go through now so we can get going on this fabulous presentation. We're going to have Q&A after the presentation, so if you've got questions, please stick them in the chat, and then we will get those answered for you after the presentation concludes. If you are looking for a volunteer opportunity, we need you. We're looking for help with hospitality and support during our events. If you're interested in volunteering, we'd love that. Please either leave a note for us in the chat, or you can visit our website, habitantheritage.org, and then click on the contact button on the left sidebar. Let us know. We sure could use you. Third, we are so happy to announce the publication of our second set of books, Le Détroit du Lac Erie, the Strait of Lake Erie. This is what the French called the Detroit River. These new volumes cover the period from 1711 to 1720. They are absolute musts for your research, for your genealogical work. If you've got a general interest in the history of early Detroit, you can visit our website to order a copy. I just got mine. They are fabulous. I've got 4 upcoming events to tell you about, and then we'll get started. You can learn more about all of these on our website. First, on Friday, May 17th, so this is coming up fast, 2 o'clock, we'll be gathering at St. Anne's Basilica to hear the ringing of the historic carillon bells, followed by a tour. The bells were recently restored thanks to a grant from the Chicago chapter of the French Heritage Society, and this event is totally free. So come on down to St. Anne's on Friday the 17th at 2 o'clock to hear them. Saturday, June 8th, we're hitting the road for a field trip to the Nokomis Cultural Heritage Center in Okemos. Our visit includes time in the Jim Lalone Genealogical Center and Research Library. Jim, as you probably know, was a co-founder of our organization, so we're really looking forward to that. We'll be sending out an e-blast with more information about the Nokomis trip, including how to register for it, later this weekend. Then Sunday, July 21st at noon, we'll be back at St. Anne's for the French Novena, followed by a buffet in the upper hall. And this is another free event not to be missed, so we'll hope you can join us there. And then lastly, we're going on another field trip the first weekend in August, Saturday, August 3rd and Sunday, August 4th. We're headed to Fort St. Joseph in Niles for its annual open house. You'll be getting more information about that as we go through the program today. But that field trip is the perfect segue to today's presentation. And I'm so happy to introduce Erika Hartley. She's an instructor at Western Michigan University, and she's also the director of the Fort St. Joseph Archaeological Project in Niles. And this is a project that she's been affiliated with for 9 years. And today she joins us to tell us the latest as the project gears up for its 26th year of excavation. So please help me welcome Erika Hartley.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning, especially because there's so many people on here. Wow, that's awesome. And then hopefully I can convince you to join their program to come out and see us in August because we have so much fun. So my name is Erika Hartley. I am the director and the curatorial fellow for the Fort St. Joseph Archaeological Project. And each summer, our archaeological excavations and investigation of Fort St. Joseph recover thousands of different items, religious, military, domestic artifacts, and they all tell us about the people who were once living in this time period and what was happening out on this frontier post. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background information today, and then we'll go through some of our more recent findings and talk about a little bit of outreach. So as many of you guys know, France is establishing trading posts, missions, and they're really expanding and sustaining their influence in the New World during this time. They start in the St. Lawrence River Valley, they head up the Great Lakes, down to the Mississippi, and then Louisiana Gulf Coast. And there's posts and missions throughout there, as you can see on the map. This is ramped up during the 17th and the 18th centuries. But before that, Native Americans and their ancestors have been occupying the area for thousands of years. In the Great Lakes region, it's largely Algonquin tribe. So the Potawatomi and Miami are living there. They do before the area becomes inhabited, just before they are moving towards northern Illinois and the Green Bay area of Wisconsin. This is largely due to the rest coming from the Iroquois. And then in the 1680s, the Miami are returning to the St. Joseph River Valley with the Jesuit priest Father Alloway. He's credited to bringing him back in some sources, but whether he was joining them on their trip, on their way back, or they've decided on their own, that's still in debate. So in the area for Fort St. Joseph in the 1680s, the land is granted by France. Sorry, the talking points are right where I wanted to see. There you go. So in the 1680s, the land is granted by France for a mission in this indigenous territory. And by 1686, there is a mission established. In 1691, the Fort St. Joseph is established as a fur trading post and a garrison complex. And this is really to solidify relationships with Native American indigenous peoples in the area and stimulate the fur trade. That's the two big goals that France is doing at that time. There are about a dozen soldiers in the area that were sent there to command and build the fort. And they do that for about 80 years that the French are there. Okay, so some of the people that are living here, we have Jesuit priests, we've got French militia, fur traders, there's a blacksmith as well, and then families that are in this area. You can see some of the living history reenactors here representing those roles. So by the early 18th century, there's about 10 to 15 officers and enlisted men, a blacksmith, the interpreter, and the priest that comes on occasion, and as well as about 15 households that are living there. And you can see that through the baptismal and marriage records that are for the site. So they're living here, interacting closely with indigenous people nearby. At that point, the Potawatomi are living across from the river, and Miami are settled in the nearby area as well. So just kind of some timelines, just so you can see where everything's at. So then in 1671, British gained control of Fort St. Joseph, and they maintained control for a few years. The commandant that is in charge isn't personally liked very well. He's a little bit young. He's inexperienced. Bob Myers actually has a lot to say on him. And so if you read People of the Post, you can get a good look. But then by 1763, there's already some unrest occurring throughout the Great Lakes region. And this is when Pontiac's rebellion actually, by some of the supporters, takes over at Fort St. Joseph. They take the site from the commandant and hold it for a few years until it's given back. While after Pontiac's rebellion, the British do gain control of the site of Fort St. Joseph. They get it back, but they don't officially come back and station there. They do briefly around the American Revolution, just come back, use it as a staging ground. And in 1780, they deport 15 households to Michilimackinac because they're afraid that they will use it against the British at that time period. And then in 1781, there's a Spanish raid that comes up the site. They claim the site for about 24 hours, and then they continue on and head back down to St. Louis, where they're coming from largely. So 1781, that's really the official end of Fort St. Joseph in the occupation. So French survival at Fort St. Joseph was really dependent upon the close interaction between the Native Americans that were there, as well as the European settlers. They exchanged a lot of material goods. They assisted in different warfare opportunities throughout. They lived, some Native Americans ended up marrying some of the French settlers that were there. They would serve as godmothers. And for nearly a century, Fort St. Joseph itself really served as a hub of commercial, military, and religious activity for European and indigenous groups in that Southwest Michigan area. And these are just some of the people that are represented in our living history reenactors as those that would have been there at the site. So after it was abandoned, we don't really know exactly what happened to Fort St. Joseph. There's no record saying that, okay, they left as 1781 now from this time period. This is what happened until about the 1830s. So we have a little bit of a gap. The land was settled and farmed during that time, and Niles became a city. And then in the late 1880s to early 19, should say 1890s. Not 19, sorry, typo. But there were dams that were constructed across the St. Joseph River. So one was constructed first, and then it was built upon, and they both raised the river up. You can see here, there's a picture of the dam as well as some of the results from with the dam now, the site of Fort St. Joseph actually floods each year throughout the year. And is now on an active floodplain. In the 1930s, the area was lower as a result and wet as a result of the dam. So the area was used as a landfill. It's kind of the perfect spot to put your trash there. And at that time, a lot of people did it across the United States to fill in swampier land. And then in 1961, they stopped using it and halted. It was more of a city dump, but it was also used by a local company as well. But nevertheless, even as the property was used for different purposes throughout the years, the memory of Fort St. Joseph was never really forgotten. The community always was there. They were always advocating, talking about the history of Fort St. Joseph. And so while they thought it was in that area specifically because the land was settled and farmed, they were finding artifacts that local groups were. They didn't specifically have what they needed to say, this is where it's at. So what happened was, here's some of the artifacts that they were recovering when they were plowing the fields, is they took this evidence, they took some of the artifacts, they verified they are from the time period. They resided in the Niles History Museum, now the Niles History Museum, then the Fort St. Joseph Museum. And they talked to people and they wanted to know, okay, like, how can we do something about this fort? We really want to preserve it. We want to locate it archaeologically. And a group from Niles actually came to Western. They made a phone call. They talked to Michael Massani, and they said, hey, we have this fort. We have these artifacts. Can you help us find its exact location? From this, Dr. Pizer was a part of this group. He examined and translated numerous French documents. A lot of the documents we have about Fort St. Joseph are actually from his work. He was the one that suggested that it is located in this area on the St. Joseph River, and helped support the fort, the local group, invite Dr. Nassani down to perform shovel tests. So they performed about 350 shovel tests across this entire area. See if I can get can you see my pointer? Yeah, okay. I was gonna look for the highlighter, but this will work. So there's the commemorative boulder that I was showing you, this big boulder here. That's located here. And in the past, they had a lot of different surveys in this near the commemorative boulder, but they weren't actually finding 18th century material up here. And so what they did is Dr. Nassani took and did shovel test transects all across the area. They did find a lot of the trash resulting from the landfill, but they did find some 18th century materials as well. And so they knew that they were getting closer. There was also happened to be a person that was a local collector, a metal detector, that was nearby when they were surveying, and he showed them some of the things that he had found from the edge of the river. And so highlighting that they weren't looking deep enough because this area was because of all the flood that had happened, it had buried what was happening on site. So it is not only just the 18th century materials buried by what was been plowed and disturbed, then you also have all this other soil that was deposited from the river. And so that was making it even harder to find. So that is where the large concentration is of our site. And this is where most people see on the floodplain is this 20B, 23 Fort St. Joseph location. So in 1998, they found evidence of Fort St. Joseph. They found knives, stamps with French cutler names. They found seed beads and hand wrought nails, gun parts, all of the things that you would expect to find at an 18th century fort, they were starting to find. So they had evidence, and Fort St. Joseph was refound in this location then. So to further kind of look into the fort, they decided, okay, what are our next steps? And they wanted to investigate to look for features, for ecofacts and artifacts, because they had a lot of different questions. At this time, the local community really wanted to rebuild the fort. They had big envisions of Fort Mackinac, Michilimackinac, maybe not that grand, but they did want to reconstruct a fort. And Michael was more interested, and we are still interested in the interaction that's occurring between Native Americans and Europeans. What's happening when they come together and they are forced to rely and meet and interact with each other due to this like close proximity. Because there's different theories about what's happening at that time, and so he's trying to investigate that a little bit further. Won't go too deep into that. So they perform a geophysical survey. So that's here. This is the magnetometer map that they did. And this is highlighting different anomalies in the soil to point out where they should start looking. And they place units because of that. This is how they ended up finding a lot of the fireplaces early on the floodplain, such as the one that's here. They also found a gunsmith's cache. So it had over 100 different gun parts in there that they could use and interchange. And then throughout this, we also found a lot of middens as well. So here's a deer bone jaw mandible that they're excavating around. So from all this archaeological work over the past several field seasons, we're literally recreating the map of what Fort St. Joseph looked like. We don't know what it looked like. We know that it had 15 houses that were abandoned. We know that there was a commandant, there's a blacksmith, but we don't know where they're located at site. We don't have the nice maps that they have of Michilimackinac or other sites where they say, okay, this person lived here or this structure looked like this. We don't have that right now. Doesn't mean they're not out there somewhere waiting for us to find, but we just don't have that evidence. So each year we're putting together the information we learned from our excavations and recreating that map. And that's what we have here. So from the fireplaces, this one right here, this is actually the fireplace feature 2 that's in this home here. And then based on the other architectural evidence that we're looking at, the foundation walls, wooden posts, we're able to outline the projection of these houses. We're able to see how big they might have been, comparing those two houses and room sizes at other forts across New France as well. And so we've been able to approximize them. They don't look the same as those at other sites, specifically those that have row houses. These are more individual rooms that it looks like at this point. So we do know that from these outlines that they are using Poteau and Terre and Poteau Sole methods, construction methods. They're keeping with that French style, even though there are plenty of other styles that they could have picked. They decided to make it in the French vernacular style, retracing their roots from northwestern France. They're also importing construction materials. So they're importing window glass all the way from Europe. They're likely importing a lot of these building materials as well. While they do have a blacksmith on site, I'm not sure if he's making all of the nails needed for these houses. That would take a long time. I mean, a nail is still relatively quick, but there are a lot of nails that we have recovered. So they are likely importing some of them as well. Some of the hardware, so like the strap hinge there, you can actually see how they're modifying it. So right here is the nail there. So what they did is they bent it. So the nails must have went through the wood that they had available, and they had to bend the side just like we would today if they stuck out. So no one got hurt. And then here you can see some of those posts right there, and then as well as the foundation wall that was left behind. We can also learn more about their subsistence practices. So at our site, they're relying more on wild taxa than they are on domesticated animals. So there's a large reliance on wild animals, specifically deer, an overwhelming amount of deer found at our site. We also have found some plant remains, and while we've identified some maize, grape seeds, and peach pits at our site, we are working through some of our flotation samples and trying to learn more from that with a local archaeobotanist, Katie Parker. So hopefully we'll have more to share on that soon, and it will be interesting to see if they're also relying on more wild plants, which I suspect they are from the faunal remains that Terry has identified thus far. There we go. For adornment and dress, so we have evidence of glass beads, lead seals that were once attached to cloth that's coming across from France. We have a lot of needles, scissors, a pair, maybe a couple fragments, some straight pins and thimbles, and all these are pointing to keeping that European style dress, even out on the frontier. This specific seal, it says that it's from Lille. So you can see there's a couple other ones that we can trace. And if you've read any of the work by Catherine Davis, she's able to point to specific merchants from some of the lead seals that we found at our site and where they were located at in France, which is really cool. Here's some of the evidence of buckles and buttons, cufflinks. There's some rings as well. It's all pointing to maintaining that French European style of dress at our site, even on the frontier. So they are importing these items if they did not bring them all with them. They're also pretty self-sufficient. They are making their own musket balls and lead shot, and sometimes we found some sprue. We have found axes, so they're maintaining their own houses. There was likely a carpenter there, but it's not always clear when he was there, when he was not. So they probably had to do a lot of it themselves, or maybe band together, work together for that. There are some fish hooks that are found on the site. We have not found a lot of fish remains just yet. So it's something that has kind of intrigued us. Where are the fish remains? Because we do have some of the hooks, but I'm sure they're out there and we'll get to them at some point. We can also see that they are repurposing items as well. So they're making a lot of tinkling cones from copper kettles that were brought in. There are also bone disc that they're making. There's awls made out of bone. So they are trying to repurpose items and use them as they need at the site. And there's also some religious artifacts that we found as well. So we have a variety of crosses and crucifix, medallions, rosary beads. This is one of the cool crosses that we found recently. You can see that it was engraved. So it was likely made on site or nearby because it was probably repurposed out of something else. It has a few little lines that are there. We can't quite outmake what it was before that, but then they actually turned it into a cross. Someone at the site. It was pretty cool. Just shows their dedication to their religious faith. They're willing to make that. So in 2019, we started, well, we'd probably thinking about it for a while before that. And Michael had probably I don't know, he'd probably been pondering about this for a few years before that. We had found these structures. We recognized where people were living at, but you can see there's only 6 of them. And so from our archaeological work, this one we actually think is a blacksmith slash his workshop slash his domestic home. So really there's about 5 places that people are living at if this is his workshop. And we're thinking, okay, well, if they deported 15 households, where are the rest of the households? So from that magnetometer survey that I showed you earlier, there wasn't too much further out into the St. Joseph River because people always ask if they got washed away when the dam was put in. And that's not the case. It doesn't appear to be. So we started thinking, okay, well, where else could we start looking? Well, let's start expanding beyond the floodplain. So that's what they did in 2019, is we started looking here to the south in the early 20th century landfill. So what we did is we cut through the landfill in 3 trenches. We've only explored 2 of them though, because at our site to excavate anywhere at the site, you have to dewater it. So we have to put in special PVC pipes and pump the water out as we're excavating. And we were only able to do that for 2 of the trenches at that time. We're really trying to explore those site boundaries again, try to figure out, okay, what is the extent of the site? Because once we know how big the site is, the total area of it, we'll be able to better determine how we should keep researching it. So from those excavations, they found a variety of different material. So this is some of the trenches. You can see the students in there working in their units. One of them was a fragment of a bone crucifix. You can see that's pretty cool. The head's right here and the legs are here. It's actually pretty small. I'd have to like no more than 2 inches. It's pretty small. and it has an amazing amount of detail. Then we also found this lead adornment piece. We're not really sure exactly what this is. It looks like it's cut with scissors here along the edges, and then it was pinched together. It's pretty heavy, so I don't think that they're wearing it in their nose or anything like that, but maybe on their outfit. If anyone has seen anything like that, please let us know, because that is actually one of the artifacts that has been eluding us for a while. We found more maize. So on the floodplain, I'll go back to that graph. We found one smudge pit up here. So a smudge pit is used for tanning hides. So what they would do is dig out a small little hole, put in some green corn cobs that will smoke really nicely, and then you can wrap the hides around it on like the triangular wooden setup, kind of like a teepee, a small, where you'd wrap the wood or the fur around it to smoke it. So we only have evidence of one on our floodplain site, and that's near the blacksmith complex. The other ones that we have that are associated with the same time period as Fort St. Joseph are up further on the Lynn site, so closer, farther towards the Boulder. And so they're not really quite associated with these structures. So finding some more maize down here is actually pretty impressive. And we found them by happenstance in one of the soil samples from the PVC pipes that we put in to dewater the site. So it's pretty exciting. We found more lead seals, fragmented knife, and then of course 18th century bottle glass there with the patina. So from that, we recognize, okay, there are further evidence of 18th century material in this area. So we know that they're doing something out here, but the way that the trenches were, you can see they're not quite big enough to give us that whole picture of what's happening. And to really investigate that further, we would need to remove more of the landfill. But our overall goal right now is just to identify where they are. So before we try to work on removing more of that landfill and expanding those trenches, we wanted to see if we could look elsewhere to identify more evidence so we could get a better spatial boundary of where the site is. So instead of returning to the trenches in 2022, we decided to excavate more to the west. And that's what we've been doing last year and what we'll do again this year. So here we again are finding more 18th century material. Here's some of the students that you can see on site as they've been working. So in this first one, we started off, okay, we know that there's likely the structure. This was identified earlier in 2018. They're able to see the cut stones. Doesn't quite look like a fireplace at this point because there's not enough burning. But it is part of the habitation some site. You can see right here, this stone has been cut. Oops, sorry, clicked on it. So there's probably a post that was put there. I'm in the middle of it, like it was cut around it. So we were trying to explore that a little bit further in 2022 and then 2023. And we found more evidence of lead seals, some pipe fragments, and then some personal adornment as well. They found even more when they kept going. All they found, unfortunately, this past year was that one large structural stone that kind of butt up right over here, it would have been. So we do know that it's going this way. We just can't quite define what the structure is at this point. So we'll have to keep investigating this specific area. But still a lot of material coming from the area. Close by, we found a large, well, medium to large, it's a boucheron knife, a knife blade that was there. It does need a little bit of conservation work because we're hoping that there will be a French name stamped in this one as well. It's in great condition for being in the site for that long. And then we also were able to find 3 different lead seals from this same one unit, which was pretty impressive that we found that many. And then if you can look right here, there's evidence of a post that was found. So we're going to come back and explore that a little bit further to see if it lines up with anything else, because we only had found that one post at that time. And then nearby, again, another lead seal. So something is happening with cloth in this area, whether they're repurposing the lead seals for something else, or this is just an area where they are importing a lot of cloth. We're not sure, but there's quite a few. We also have gun flints, some fans, another stone pipe bowl, hand wrought knives, glass from containers, seed beads, a button, and And then this looks like it's possibly a coin. We're still looking into that though. You can't make out anything that was written on it. We only have one coin from the site so far, and they were only really able to tell that because they found the exact weight and size of another coin that had been found archaeologically at the time period. So we're hopeful that maybe we can do the same for this one. Further on, as we moved away, we did find less artifacts, so it is showing that we are reaching the site of the boundary, and you'll see that as I go through these units. But we were able to find this beautiful neck and shoulder of a green 18th century bottle, olive green glass. And then we found another fish hook as well, so that was kind of exciting. Found some bone as well, a turtle shell from there, and a gun part out of this unit over here. Ring they found, and this year had a beautiful blue glass on each side of them, but as it got a little wet, the glass did pop out, so we had to keep that in a separate container. And some more faience, beads, gunflint, glass, a hinge from way out here, which is exciting because so maybe there is another structure. We're just not quite in that same area. You can see that there. And then another gunflint, and this looks like it was a cut piece of maybe a coin, maybe something, a weight or something. Trying to figure that out specifically. This unit had a nice heart-shaped ring, plaque ring in it, as well as some faience and tinkling cone, and then the pipe stem. And then way out here in this unit, we actually found half of a catlinite pendant. You can see that the stone right here was drilled in, and then it likely was drilled in from this end, which is why it's not straight. So the other side of it is very smooth, but we only found half. And then we also found this large rock feature. We're not really sure what it is. We found that near the end of the field season last year, so we're hoping to investigate that this year. So if you come to our site, you'll get to see hopefully what we found and what that will indicate, because it's very strange and it looks much different than any of the other features we found on site so far. And then way out here, they did not find hardly anything in their site, similar to the unit before. They had a musket ball, a piece of ceramic, and a tinkling cone. So we are reaching the edge as we go further out at the site. We just can't find the defined boundary. We know that from the historical documents, there is a palisade that should have been around the site. It's mentioned a few different times, but we don't have evidence of that just yet either. So maybe one day. So along just with our excavations, we do a lot of education too. So the field school students, they not only are trained in how to excavate, we also bring them back to the lab and show them how to put together different displays, such as the artifact cases. We show them how to process artifacts and how to record them, their field notes into the digital field notes, so that way they're preserved for all to see. We have them inventory the items each year. They come back and help us with that. And then not only just the items that we recover from Fort St. Joseph, we're also working on a large inventory of the entire collection. And some of them have been assisting with that. So far, we've done adornment items and some clothing items to date. And then we're working on going through a lot of the other ones, specifically the botanical remains we've been inventorying lately. So that way we can send them off. We've also had students that are analyzing some of the artifacts for their own research, so gaining some education in that too. We had somebody look at ceramics, specifically the faience. Emma did this past semester, and they actually were identifying the different types of blue on white faience to see what types of varieties we had, and they're going to compare those to some of the creamware to see the proportions at the site and maybe their location, so we can identify where certain people might have been living at. We also had people do glass bottles and musket balls. The musket balls, Carson was able to identify a few of the guns based on the caliber of the musket balls, which was really cool. And then the necklace beads and some smoking pipe. We are currently have somebody working on scanning some of the artifacts too, so we can put them out on Sketchfab. We only have 2 right now, but that'll be nice so everybody can see them throughout the year. We attend a variety of different conferences and events. If anyone goes to Michigan Archaeology Day, You will have typically seen us there. If you haven't went, I highly recommend it. It's for the public. It's in October. There are so many different projects there and so much you can learn from that event. We love it. So we always attend. You can find us on the second floor. We offered spring break events, take home crafts. We go to local schools. There's a variety of different things that we participate in. Um, Here's some of the other examples that we do. And then during the summer, we also have summer camps too. So there are middle schoolers that come out and they can participate in the dig. They learn about archaeology. There's high schoolers, there's lifelong learners that we have as well. And then we also have local groups, specifically from the YMCA, that comes out and learns about our site, views our excavations, and gets a little bit more knowledge about the New France in the 18th century time period than what they received during the year. A little bit of a different type of learning experience. And then lastly is our big open house event. So this is in August. It's the first weekend. So this is the event that you guys are talking about attending. There's a lot of different things that you can do throughout the year or throughout the day, the 2-day time period. So we have our wet screen setups. You can see how we're finding our artifacts. There's the zooarchaeology program, so you can look at some of the bones that have been recovered and how Terry identifies them. You can see living history reenactors. They can tell you about different specific items that they have in their collection, and then also how they might have usually they tie them into some of the items that we found that year too, so you can kind of see the full and some of the fragments that we've recovered. There's quill writing, there's tours of our site, so there's a lot of stuff that you can do. So that's kind of what I have for this moment, but I'm happy to talk further. If you have questions, happy to answer them. I can explain something a little bit more in depth if you would like. I was trying to give a nice overview. So
Erika, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. If you have questions for Erika, please drop them in the chat. While we're waiting, I have a couple to ask you, Erika.
sure.
So you mentioned that as you were looking for these other structures, given that there were 15 families that were removed, they're not in the river. How close was the riverbank to those structures that you have found in the
Oh,
18th
that
century?
is a great question. I think I forgot to mention that. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to see if I have a map that will fit. Okay. So here along this, it's just a kind of a map of what today would have looked like. The riverbank would have been on this side before the dam. And so then it came over and much closer to the site. So this would have been the deep channel over here.
And you
So
mentioned that there was a Potawatomi village on the other side
yep,
of
right
the
over
river.
there. So it's a high bank. I wish I had a canoe picture because that would have fit in really good. Because whenever they take a picture of the canoes that go out during the open house, they always get the other side of the riverbank, but I must not have included it in this one. But it's much higher on the other side. And there was evidence of Potawatomi village that they found from the historic record. Other people have documented that they were living across the site. Right now, it was likely destroyed, altered. Modern construction has taken over the other side.
So
So
the tinkling cones that were recovered, so is your hypothesis that those were made by colonists, made by soldiers for an indigenous community, or were those made in an indigenous community that and they found their way to the fort?
see, and I don't know that. It's hard to see exactly what they were doing. What I think is happening is that people that are living in Fort St. Joseph might be making them and trading them, or they might be wearing them themselves for traders. I know there are a couple examples from other areas where they are wearing them as well. So it could be either one. We do know that there are several fur traders and people that are living there have relationships with indigenous people, either via their wives or maybe they're Métis themselves. And so that might be one reason why they're being made at the site.
Cool. So questions come in on the chat. What is a nose, Bob?
Just like just a nose earring. Yeah,
Um,
they call them like an ear bob or a nose bob. They're usually like a circular hook that would go in there, and then there's like a ball that would go there. I don't, let me see. Okay.
So another comment came in. We did catch a glimpse of a big house on the opposite side of the river. and assuming that the Potawatomi village was close to that large home.
Yeah, yep. From the historic documents, that's where it places them. There's that one early on the Hutchins map that describes it. He was going through in the 1760s and recording where people were living at. He was an English cartographer, and he's doing it because he's assessing the sizes of different villages. And so here he records that there's 200 men there, specifically probably looking at how many fighting men were there for his purposes.
So the third trench that was dug but has not been investigated so far, are there plans eventually to do that, or are you concentrating your efforts on the other two?
We would like to go back to that one. We did pull a couple of core samples out of it. We found some 18th century material. I think a pipe stem was specifically found there, as well as some bone, and maybe a piece of lead shot and a seed bead. We do want to go back to that. We would have to put in more well points at that point. And from our investigations of the first two, we really need to widen that area. You can only get a small glimpse of what's happening, and you can confirm that there's 18th century activity there, but it's really hard to interpret what that is in a 1-by-1 unit.
So if we could talk primary sources for a moment, other than baptismal records, what other documentation exists for the colonists who lived there?
So they have the baptismal records, they have the marriage records, they also have Dr. Pizer transcribed a lot of trade lists as well too, and some other vouchers, payment vouchers. And those you can all find in the Zhang library, has them on file. The translations anyways. And then I think the Niles library also has a copy. I haven't used that one, but I assume that they would have a copy in Niles.
What about the relationship between Fort Miami at the mouth of the St. Joseph River and Fort St. Joseph? What was there a relationship between the two?
Fort Miami is earlier than Fort St. Joseph. So that fort was established by LaSalle. He was only occupied for a very brief moment in time and was destroyed. I'm not as familiar exactly what happened because it is a little bit earlier. But it was before they came up the St. Joseph River, and then they established Fort St. Joseph. So it does often get confused for Fort St. Joseph, which is kind of what was happening before when Dr. Pizer was translating and transcribing these documents, is because people always thought, St. Joseph, Fort St. Joseph should be there. And there's a few historians that do talk about that, but it's not. That was Fort Miami was in St. Joe.
So a comment came in that the NDL, is that the library?
Yeah, it's the Niles District Library.
Niles District Library. So the library has a copy of the work that Dr. Pizer did for the city in the late 70s and 80s. Okay, thank you for that. That's great.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. She's like one of our fort volunteers. Very knowledgeable.
Other questions? So I imagine you will be on site August 3rd and 4th during the open house. So if we come up with other things we want to ask you about, we can ask you in person then.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be on site both days. And then I think that if you do come out and attend the tour, I have arranged Michael Nassani to actually give you a historic tour of the site in the area. So I have that. I think you guys are at 1 p.m. So right after lunch, and you can walk around, and his tours are really nice. Most people love that because he gives you a more in-depth look at the area, the site. He can answer all of your questions. Obviously, he's been involved with the project and led it for many years. And so you'll really benefit from that. I hope most people love his tours. I think it'll be really nice.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, please join me in thanking Erika Hartley for this fabulous presentation. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. Our next meeting is our annual potluck in September. More details are forthcoming. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.